Chapter number 18 of the Life of Captain James Cook, the Circumnavigator, by Arthur Kitson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 18 1779 to 1780. Third voyage concluded. On the 4th of February the ships unmoored and sailed from the bay, steering to the north in hopes of finding a better anchorage. The wind was very light, and the progress was so slow that it gave Terreeoboo an opportunity of sending off a further present of food. Soon after a gale sprang up, and the canoes which had accompanied them beat a hasty retreat, leaving a good many, mostly women, on board the ships. About midnight the fore and main topsails were split, but towards morning the wind died away and they were able to bend fresh sails. A second gale came on again at night, putting them under double-reefed topsails, with topgallant yards sent down, and at daybreak the foremast was found to be so badly sprung that it was absolutely necessary it should be unstepped for immediate repairs. After considerable hesitation, for he fully recognised that the place must be almost denuded of surplus provisions, Cook decided to return to Karakakoa Bay, as no other convenient place was known, and the ships again anchored there on the 11th, starting immediately to unstep and get the mast ashore, when it was found to be rotten at the heel as well as sprung. Wood that had been cut at Eimeo for anchor stocks was used for fishing the head, and the work proceeded rapidly, the priests making the camp taboo, so that there should be no interference with the workmen. When the ships arrived in the bay, hardly a canoe was to be seen, and none came out to the ships. This, contrasted with their first reception, was the cause of some surprise, and in view of what happened afterwards, of some suspicion. But Mr. King, who had more intercourse with the natives than any of the other officers, was thoroughly satisfied that they neither meant nor apprehended any change of conduct. Burney says that Terreeoboo and some of the chiefs visited them on the 12th, and asked many questions about their return, and did not seem well satisfied with the answers received. Trouble commences. Everything went smoothly till the afternoon of the 13th, when the officer in charge of the watering party complained to King that the conduct of some of the natives was suspicious, and some of the chiefs were driving away men he had engaged to help in rolling the casks to the boats. King sent a marine with side-arms to help to restore order, but shortly after was informed the natives were armed with stones and getting very noisy, so he went down himself, with a marine armed with his musket, and succeeded in setting matters right. Just at this time Cook came ashore, and King reported what had occurred, receiving orders to fire with ball if he received any insolence or stones were thrown. Soon afterwards shots were heard from the Discovery, and a canoe was seen making for the shore, closely pursued by one of the ship's boats. Cook, King, and a marine ran to intercept them, but were too late, as the occupants of the canoe landed before they could reach the spot. Burney says the disturbance, commenced by a native stealing a pair of carpenter's tongs, jumped overboard with them, and placing them in a canoe which at once paddled off. The thief was caught, flogged, and put in irons till the tongs were returned from the shore. The same tongs were again stolen in the afternoon, and the thief got away with them, pursued by Edgar, the master, in the ship's cutter, and joined by the Resolution's pinnace. The thief reached shore first, put the tongs, the lid of the harness cask, and a chisel in a second canoe, which went out, and handed them over to Edgar. Edgar, seeing Cook and King running along the shore, thought it right to detain the second canoe, which unfortunately belonged to Parea, who at the time of the theft was in Clerk's cabin, and promising to obtain the tongs, had immediately left for the shore. He tried to regain possession of his canoe, but was knocked down by a sailor. And then some of the natives, who before this had been quietly looking on, began to throw stones, and so roughly handled the sailors in the pinnace that, being unarmed, they beat a retreat, swimming to some rocks out of reach of the missiles. Edgar and Vancouver remained ashore and fared badly, till Parea, who had recovered from his blow and apparently forgotten it, ordered his countrymen to stay their hands, and managed to save the pinnace from being broken up. He wanted the boats to go back to the ships, but as the oars had been taken away, this was impossible. He then started to find them, and as soon as his back was turned, the throwing began again. Edgar wished to go to the camp to find Cook, but some of the natives advised him to follow them and they would take him to Parea. He soon met him carrying one oar, followed by a man with a broken one, so they were able to make shift in the boats to the camp, being overtaken on the way by Parea in his canoe, bringing Vancouver's cap, which had been lost in the scuffle. Owing to his pursuit of the thief, Cook did not hear of all this trouble till after dark, too late to take any further steps. But King says he appeared very disturbed by the news, and remarked, "I am afraid these people will oblige me to use some violent measures, for they must not be left to imagine that they have gained an advantage over us." He then went on board his ship and ordered all natives ashore, whilst King returned to the camp, and doubling his sentries gave orders he was to be called for if any natives were seen about. At 11, 5 were seen hovering near, but when they found they were observed they made off, and later one got close to the observatory, but ran when the sentry fired over his head. When on his way to the ship the next morning for the chronometer, King was informed that the Discovery's cutter had been stolen. It had been moored to the anchor buoy. On board the Resolution, he found Cook busy loading his double-barrelled gun, and a landing party of marines being prepared. Cook said he was going ashore to try to gain possession of some of the principal chiefs in order to keep them prisoners till the boat was returned, and that he had already sent out boats to prevent anyone leaving the bay, with the intention of destroying their canoes if he could not recover the cutter by more peaceable means. The Resolution's great cutter was sent after a large sailing canoe that was making off. The small cutter was guarding the western point of the bay, and Cook, with the pinnace and launch, were going to Kauroa to try and get Terreeoboo on board the ship. He, and in fact everyone else, were confident the natives would offer no resistance if they heard the sound of but one musket. A little before 8 o'clock, Captain Cook, Lieutenant Phillips, a sergeant, corporal, and 7 marines left the ship for Kauroa, and King returned to his camp after being ordered to try and assure the natives near the observatory that they would not be hurt, to keep his men together, and to be prepared to meet any outbreak. Having seen his men were on the alert, Cook visited the priests and satisfied them that Terreeoboo would receive neither injury nor insult. Cook lands. Having picked up the Resolution's launch under the command of Lieutenant Williamson on his way, Cook landed the marines and marched into the village, where he received the usual marks of respect. He asked to see the king and his 2 young sons. The 2 boys came forward and conducted him to the hut where their father was, and after a short conversation he felt assured that Terreeoboo knew nothing about the stealing of the boat. He invited the three to accompany him to the Resolution, and the king at once consented and got up to go. However, the boy's mother came up with a few chiefs and tried to persuade him not to go, and then they got hold of him and forced him to sit down. Meanwhile a large crowd had gathered round, and Phillips, who seemed to have acted with coolness and judgment throughout the affair, drew up his men in line on some rocks near the water, about 30 yards away. After trying for some time to persuade the natives to allow their chief to go with him, Cook gave up the attempt, observing to Phillips that it would be impossible to compel them to do so without great risk of bloodshed. Unfortunately, just at this time news arrived that a chief of the first rank had been killed at the other side of the bay. The shots had been heard soon after the landing of Cook's party. It was now recognised that matters had become very serious. The natives were seen to be donning their war mats, and one man, armed with a stone in one hand and a large iron spike in the other, threatened Cook in a very insulting manner. He was told to keep quiet, but only became more furious. So Cook fired a charge of small shot into him, but his mat saved him from injury. Stones were thrown at the marines, and a chief attempted to stab Phillips, but was promptly knocked down with the butt of the latter's musket. Cook now fired his second barrel loaded with ball and killed one of the natives. But Sergeant Gibson told him it was the wrong man, so he received orders to kill the right one, and did so. The stone throwing became heavier, and the marines responded with a volley, but before they had time to reload the natives rushed them, killing 4 out of the 7 and wounding the rest. Phillips being stabbed between the shoulders, but before the blow could be repeated he managed to shoot his assailant. Cook's death. Cook was now close to the water's edge, and had turned around to order the boat's crews to cease firing and pull in. This is believed to have caused his death, for whilst he faced the natives, none of them except the one shot by Gibson had offered him actual violence, but when he turned to give orders he was struck on the head and stabbed in the back, falling with his face in a pool of water. As soon as he fell a great shout arose. He was dragged ashore, and the natives, snatching the dagger from each other, showed savage eagerness to share in his destruction. Phillips and his wounded marines plunged into the water, and covered by musketry fire gained the boats, their officer, though wounded, jumping out again to the assistance of the last man, who, severely injured by a blow on the face, was in great danger of being captured. The boats, seeing that there was no possibility of recovering the bodies of the 5 who were killed, were ordered to return at once to the ships, from which they had only been absent an hour. 9 stand of arms, Cook's double-barrelled gun, and his hanger fell into the hands of the natives. As soon as this was reported, the boats were recalled from the bay, and a strong reinforcement was sent to Mr. King, with orders to strike his camp and get the Resolution's foremast off to the ship. The Indians were seen to be assembling to the right of the tents, so the guns were turned on them, and a party was posted on the Morai to cover the place where the mast lay. About 1 o'clock everything was got away from the shore, only a few stones being thrown by natives, who thought their mats were proof against bullets, and only found out their mistake too late. Notwithstanding what had occurred, one of the priests, whom Burney calls Kerriakere, remained with the English till everything had been removed, and supplied the men with food and water. King, about 4 o'clock, was sent to try to recover the bodies of the captain and marines. He was at first received with a volley of stones, which fortunately fell short. He displayed a white flag and pulled inshore, whilst the remaining boats lay off to cover him with fire if needed. but the stone throwing was stopped, and the natives also showed the white flag. In answer to King's demand, some of the chiefs promised that the bodies should be delivered the next day, and Koah, swimming off to one of the boats, explained that they could not be given up at once as they had already been taken some distance up country. Burney, however, says that they gathered, from signs made by other Indians, that the bodies had already been cut up to pieces, and one man came down to the water flourishing Cook's hanger, with many tokens of exultation and defiance. Koah friendly. On the 15th, Captain Clerke formally took over the command of the Resolution and appointed Lieutenant Gore to the Discovery. During the day, Koah visited the ship several times, and in vain tried to persuade Clerke or King to go ashore, but it was thought inadvisable to run any further risks. In the evening, Kerriakair and a friend came off in a small canoe, bringing a bundle containing the flesh of Cook's thighs, saying that the body had been burned and the limbs distributed amongst the chiefs. They had brought all they could get unknown to the others, and Kerriakair strongly advised Clerke not to trust too much to Koah. He said that the inhabitants of the island were not inclined for peace, except those in the immediate neighbourhood, who would of course, in case of hostilities, be the chief sufferers. He gave the number of natives killed as 26, with a large number of wounded. On the 17th, the ships were warped inshore so as to command the watering place. The launches were sent in for water, with the other boats fully armed in support. They were received with showers of stones from the houses and from behind stone walls, notwithstanding guns fired from the ships and musketry from the boats at any of the natives who exposed themselves. Meanwhile, Koah again visited the ships, offering a pig as a present, and asking for someone to be sent ashore for the bodies, but he was sent away and was soon afterwards seen amongst the stone throwers. In the afternoon the boats went out again for water, but as the natives recommenced hostilities, they were ordered to keep clear, whilst the ship's guns were worked for a quarter of an hour. Then the boats' crews landed and burned all the houses between the watering place and the Morai, killing some 6 or 7 of the natives. In the evening, about 5 o'clock, some dozen natives bearing white flags and sugar cane marched down to the beach, headed by Kerriakair, carrying a small pig. He said he came as an envoy from Terreeoboo to make peace, and was accordingly taken on board the Resolution. It was ascertained from him that the boat had been stolen by some of Paria's people and had been broken up after Cook's death. During the night some canoes came out and did a little trading, and the next morning the bay was seen to be planted with white flags in different directions, and the waterers were allowed to work unmolested, whilst Kerriakair asked permission, at once granted, to make an offering to one of the images on the Morai. Soon after, Koah came off with a pig, but was not admitted to either ship. He then went off to the waterers, who sent him away, so he amused himself by throwing stones at a small party of sailors on the Morai, and drew a couple of shots from them, but escaped unhurt. Soon after, a party of natives marched down to the beach with breadfruit, etc., which they left on the beach and was afterwards taken on board. A chief, Eapo, carried a message on board from Terreeoboo, and the next day brought presents of food. On the 20th the foremast of the Resolution was stepped, and rigging commenced, and in the middle of the day a large body of natives marched in procession to the watering place, beating drums, yelling, carrying white flag, sugar cane, etc., with Eopu at their head bearing a parcel wrapped in cloth containing some of Cook's bones. He went off to the Resolution with Clerke, and soon after a boat was sent ashore for a present of food from Terreeoboo. The next day, with the same ceremonial, Eopu again appeared with all the remaining bones it was possible to recover, and was this time accompanied by Karoa, Terreeoboo's youngest son. The 21st February. At sunset the Resolution fired 10-minute guns, with the colours half staff up, when the remains of our late commander were committed to the deep. Lieutenant Williamson was severely blamed by his brother officers for not going to the assistance of the pinnace at the time of the attack on his captain, and it is said that had it not been for Clerke's ill health he would have been tried for court-martial. He was afterwards, when in command of the Agincourt, tried for disaffection, cowardice, disobedience to signals, and not having done his duty in rendering all assistance possible. He was found guilty on the last 2 counts only, and was placed at the bottom of the list of post captains, and rendered incapable of ever serving on board of any of His Majesty's ships. Cook's remains. Ellis, in his tour through Hawaii, says that King's account of Cook's death, from which the above has been largely drawn, agrees in a remarkable manner with that given by the natives. They in no way blame their visitors for what occurred, and even after his death appear to have looked upon Cook as a man of a superior race to themselves. His breastbone and ribs were long preserved as relics, and in 1832 Ellis states that there were many living who remembered the occasion, and all agreed that Cook's conduct to their countrymen was humane. Captain Clerke says, "Upon examining the remains of my late honoured and much lamented friend, I found all his bones except those of the back, jaw, and feet. The 2 latter articles Airpo brought me in the morning. The former, he declared, had been reduced to ashes with the trunk of the body. As Kerriakere had told us, the flesh was taken from all the bones except those of the hands, the skin of which they had cut through in many places, and salted with the intention, no doubt, of preserving them. Airpo likewise brought with him the 2 barrels of Captain Cook's gun. The one beat flat with the intention of making a cutting instrument of it, the other a good deal bent and bruised, together with a present of 13 hogs from Terreeoboo. The hands, as has been mentioned before, were identified by the scar left by the explosion of his powder flask in Newfoundland, which almost severed the thumb from the fingers. On the 22nd of February they were able to sail from this unlucky place, and touching at 1 or 2 of the islands worked their way northward to Kamchatka, the Resolution reaching Owatska Bay on the 29th of April, followed by the Discovery on the 1st of May. They were very handsomely treated by Major Beam, the Governor of Bolshersk, a place about 135 miles from the town of St. Peter and St. Paul in Owatska Bay. Notwithstanding Mr. Ismailov's letter of introduction, were on somewhat unsatisfactory lines. Mr. Weber was fortunately able to converse in German, which the Russian officers understood, and he ascertained that Ismailov had represented the 2 vessels as very small, and hinted that he believed them to be little better than pirates. The Governor provided the ships with what he could give them, and promised to obtain further stores from Okhotsk for them against their return. For these kindnesses the English could make but little return, and even then it was with difficulty that the Russians could be persuaded to receive anything. for they said they were only acting up to the wishes of their Empress, who desired all her allies should be treated with courtesy. One return, however, they were able to make, which was of great service. At the time of the visit of the ships, a large number of soldiers and inhabitants were suffering very seriously from scurvy, and Clerke at once put them under the care of his medical officers, who, by the use of sauerkraut and sweetwort made from the ship's stock of malt, soon caused a surprising alteration in the figures of most of them, and their speedy recovery was chiefly attributed to the effects of the sweetwort. They were informed by the Major that on the day of the arrival of the English party at Bolchersk, he had received a letter from the most northerly outpost on the Sea of Okhotsk, stating that the tribe of Tschutski, which had been long at feud with the Russians, had sent in an embassy offering friendship and tribute, giving as a reason that they had been visited by 2 large vessels in the preceding summer, and had been received on board with great kindness, and had entered into a league of friendship with their visitors. They therefore thought it their duty to ratify this treaty formally. These 2 ships could have been none other than the Resolution and Discovery, though evidently the Tschutski thought they were Russian. Death of Clerke. Leaving on the 13th of June, the Asiatic coast was followed up, and on the 1st of July they were off the Gulf of Anda, where fogs and ice began seriously to interfere with their progress. So they abandoned the Asiatic for the American side, but with no better luck. They reached the latitude of 70 degrees 33 minutes north, about 5 leagues short of the point reached the previous year, and at length, realising further efforts were useless, and resulting in serious damage to the ships from continual contact with the loose ice, Clerke determined to return to Okhotsk Bay and refit and then return to England. On the 22nd of August, the day before they reached the bay, Captain Clerke, who had long been suffering from serious ill health, died, and was buried under a tree a little to the north of the post of St. Peter and St. Paul, the crews of both ships and the Russian garrison taking part in the funeral ceremony, and the Russian priest reading the service at the grave. Clerke had been all 3 voyages with Cook, and was only 38 years of age. Gore now took command of the Resolution, Burney, Rickman and Lanyon being his lieutenants, whilst King was the new captain of the Discovery, and Williamson and Hervey his lieutenants, Bailey going with Gore in charge of the astronomical observations. On the 9th of October they left Okhotsk and were off Cape Nambu, Japan, on the 26th, but were driven off the coast by bad weather and anchored in Macau Roads on the 1st of December. Here, after considerable delay, stores were obtained from Canton, and the seamen managed to dispose of most of the furs they had obtained in the north. King estimates that the 2 ships received, in money and goods, as much as £20,000 for the skins, and says that the men were so anxious to return for more that they were almost in a state of mutiny. On the 11th of April the ships reached the Cape, where the officers were cordially received by Governor Plattenberg, who expressed the deepest regret to hear of the loss of Cook, and requested that he should be sent a portrait of the captain to place in a blank space he pointed out between 2 portraits of De Ruyter and Van Tromp, a gracious compliment. Sailing from Simon's Bay on the 9th of May, the trades were picked up on the 14th, and on the 13th of June the line was crossed in longitude 26 degrees 16 minutes west. The coast of Ireland was sighted on the 12th of August, and an attempt was made to get into Galway Bay, but strong southerly winds drove them to the north, and at length, rounding the north of Scotland, they put into Stromness, whence Captain King was dispatched overland to the Admiralty. The ships arrived off the Nore on the 14th of October, after an absence of 4 years, 2 months and 22 days. King meets King. On the 14th of February 1781, the second anniversary of Cook's death, King, accompanied by Mr. Banks, was presented to His Majesty, who was pleased to accept the journals of the Resolution and Discovery kept during this eventful voyage. End of chapter 18.